welcome to the first Gold Room lecture of the year. So tonight we're going to have Charlotte Pence and Adam Prince read to us. So the night is going to be divided into two readings for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have some time for questions. So it is with great pleasure that I'm introducing Charlotte and Adam. So Charlotte is a professor of English and creative writing at Eastern Illinois University, and she's now a visiting faculty member this term at Harlaxton. Her poetry often merges the personal with the scientific. Her first book of poems, Many Small Fires, from which she's reading tonight, won 4 award reviews in the Fab Book of the Year this year, which is an honor chosen by librarians and independent booksellers. The book explores her father's chronic homelessness while simultaneously detailing the physiological changes that enabled humans to form cities, communities, and households. She's also the author of 2 award-winning poetry chapbooks and the editor of The Poetics of American Song Lyrics, which was published by the University Press of Mississippi in 2012. New poems have recently been published in Epoch, Harvard Review, and the Southern Review. Now we're going to have Adam Prince, born and raised in Southern California, has since lived in New York, South Korea, Arkansas, Nicaragua, Tennessee, and Illinois. His award-winning fiction has appeared in the Missouri Review, the Southern Review, and Narrative Magazine, among others. In 2011, Narrative Magazine named him one of the best 20 new writers. He's currently at work on a novel as well as a television series. He received his doctoral degree from the University of Tennessee and is the author of a collection of stories called The Beautiful Wishes of Ugly Men, from which he's reading tonight, which was published by Black Lawrence Press in 2012. So join me in welcoming Charlotte first.
Hi, everyone. It's terrific to be here. You know, when I was young, dreaming about being a writer, I had all these elaborate fantasies about what it was going to be like. And then you actually sort of manage to do it if you're lucky and you work hard. And none of these fantasies come true. You manage to maybe publish a book, which very few people read. And you spend a lot of time talking to students about things like comma splices and run-on sentences, which they don't care about at all, and frankly, I don't either. But there are these moments every now and again when you get in a situation that precisely corresponds with a fantasy that you had when you were 12 and imagining what it would be like as a writer, and you in a place like this and you look around and you think, yeah, that's about right, that'll do. So anyway, this is great. My work, you guys are a little bit of a tricky audience to read for, I think. Very, very mixed group in a lot of ways. So, and my work is, it's a little racy, so, fair warning. So I didn't decide what I was going to read until about now, okay? And for better or for worse, my work is, so here's like pretty smutty and here's sort of subtle and elegant. As a group, I'm going to put you like right about here, okay? So just, if it's too much or if you just don't believe that literature should be about this stuff, I won't be offended. You can leave the room. We can talk about the value of writing about this stuff, during the wine, after, or catch me in the hall, or, whatever. So unsavory characters, is some of what I do. And this, I'm going to read about half of this story. And I'm going to take you up to a point where hopefully you're really interested, and then I'm just going to stop. This story is called Big Wheels for Adults. Time passed, and Peter didn't know what to do. He never liked long hugs, not even from women, and this was soon becoming one of the longest of his life. He was getting squirmy, uncomfortable, while Jocko just kept hanging on, pulling so tight that Peter could feel the density of his old friend's fat. It was maybe a full minute before Jocko let out what seemed a conclusive sigh. Peter started to loosen his arms, but Jocko went in for one more clinch. It was to make some point, thought Peter, some claim about who was the better friend, the better man. And they would never examine precisely why he didn't like long hugs. A reason appeared to him now. There was something coercive about them. I've been doing great, said Jocko, though he didn't look it and Peter hadn't asked. His eyes had gone wider and he'd put on more weight. His skin had the tint of a yellow crayon. He was 31, but might have passed for 45. Peter felt sorry for his childhood friend, and at the same time proud of himself for having gotten through his own 31 years looking so much better. Carly joined them in the entryway, and Jocko bent down to kiss her hand. "Lovely to see you," he said, and then in a completely different tone, as if Peter's girlfriend had gone from a princess one moment to a cocktail waitress the next, "How about you make us some Jack and Cokes?" Carly played along, made the drinks. Peter smirked to himself, knowing that most women with her education and career would probably have told Jocko to eat shit. But she had never been that way. Unlike Jocko, she seemed to have nothing at all to prove. Soon the three sat together in Peter and Carly's catalog-looking living room with its celery and azure color scheme. She had put the entire apartment together and paid for most of it, too. It was the first nice apartment they'd ever occupied. Peter was cozy there and restless within that coziness, much the way he would get in the midst of a long hug. Jocko talked and Carly humored him. He told her about the $7,000 he'd just made selling a guitar he'd bought at a pawn shop back when he was on the road. He snapped the cash out of his gold Harley-Davidson money clip. "That's a lot of money, huh?" he prompted, and Carly agreed that it was. Peter knew that Carly was avoiding his gaze so as not to give her amusement away, and this made Peter want to catch that glance all the more. Still, even as he tried, he knew it wouldn't happen. So he looked on with a mix of tenderness and quiet hilarity, the joy of being on the inside of a joke. It was when other people were around that Peter loved her best, and these moments often fueled him through the others. Not until after Peter had kissed her goodbye did Carly finally relent and look at him. It was a couple's kind of look, an arch in one eyebrow, a private smile communicating how, when he got home, the two of them would review this entire evening, would say to each other, "Can you believe that guy?" and agree that no, they could not. The last time Peter had been to a strip club was with Carly on a winter break trip to Montreal back when they were still in college. It was an all-nude place where the women were beautiful in that French way, full lips, easy slenderness, a naked liquid prowl. And then there was Carly, short and rounded in her puffy orange sweater. They had taken a table far from the stage, Peter facing it and Carly across from him, so that he had to look over her shoulder to see. While all the other patrons were either catcalling or stewing in a quiet, lustful daze, Peter and Carly had an academic discussion about how, in a strip club, things like power and sincerity were hard to gauge. "It's not the whole objectification thing that bugs me," said Carly, while the dark-skinned blonde poured oil down her breasts and stomach. "Or, I mean it is, but that's too boring to bring up. It's more this falseness." She pointed out a girl all in pink, high heels, garters, very short skirt, a young girl with her ear to the mouth of a shriveled old man. Her head bobbed along in sympathy to whatever he was telling her. Carly felt bad for the girl, she said, since play-acting along to male fantasy didn't allow room for who they were. Peter tried to see Carly's point and made a counterpoint about how every job involved some acting, whether it was selling real estate or being a UN ambassador. It wasn't much of a discussion, really, more a verbal fidgeting, a way of insisting on the world of ideas when the world of things pressed in too hard. Peter couldn't stop staring at the girls, couldn't manage to pull what he knew was a wide, shit-eating grin down off his face. "Don't you feel sorry for them?" Carly asked, sounding pitiable herself. "Yeah," he said, but he knew it wasn't convincing, and how could it have been, coming through that shit-eating grin? They went on talking about how much or little money the strippers probably made, about the possible evolutionary impetus between the appeal of a woman's legs spread wide, but Peter's grin and stare would not leave him, and even though he knew Carly was getting even more uncomfortable, her eyes flitting around the room for somewhere safe to look, from the girls to Peter's face, to the black wall behind him, and down into her plastic cup of lousy red wine. It had been Carly's idea to go there. She'd been a virgin until Peter, and the first time they'd had sex was just the night before. Now, looking back, all Peter could guess was that by going to the strip club, Carly had wanted to show how easygoing she could be, how game, and the whole thing turned out harder than she had imagined. The two of them walked back to their motel through a light, persistent snow. Peter took off both their clothes and made love to her in the dark. Now, years later, Peter could remember the exact mood of it, a touched and poignant sadness, a need to make everything up to her. And in her own attempt at a conciliatory gesture, Carly had imitated the strippers in the way she spread her legs, her thicker, more ordinary legs. Hope was this one's name, all trim curves and youth. a wide-eyed pixie with a mess of dark hair, braless and perfect in a thin white t-shirt and what seemed to be men's underwear, but baby blue with a decal on the front that said, "No dice," accompanied by a picture of 2 dice. She wasn't a very good dancer, too routine, and from that bored, half-there look on her face, she might as well have been stirring her morning's oatmeal. Still, she was one of the best-looking women Peter had ever seen in real life, and the curve of her waist flaring to hips gave him an instant and painful erection. He wanted to get lost in the wanting, to fix the whole of his recently preoccupied attention onto the way she was finally, mercifully peeling off that shirt, but Jocko wouldn't shut up. "Well, a lot of options on the table," he was saying. "I got an offer from this producer buddy of mine, Bill Boyd, to manage the Steppenwolf reunion tour. You remember Steppenwolf? Born to be Wild? Hell yeah, I was. Sober 3 years and it bored the shit out of me. So the Steppenwolf thing. But then I've got all these ideas too, like this stuff I'm working on, like big wheels for adults, bigger big wheels because they're for adults. Wait till Crystal gets here. You'll love her, smoking body. She's got this clit ring. I haven't fucked her yet, because when I'm in a relationship, I'm in it. But now," he slapped the table, waved around his beer. Jocko and his girlfriend had just broken up, so this was a night of proving that he was better off without her. He often had dramatic breakups, but what made this one particularly hard was the fact that his now ex-girlfriend was Simone White, a famous folk singer. And over the year or so he'd been with her, Jocko had started thinking of himself as famous by association. Simone had even made him her tour manager, despite the fact that his work experience up to that point had been limited to odd jobs in the service industry, selling coke, transporting coke across the Mexican border, and laying tile with a company connected to his rehab. So now, Jocko was out of a job too, and putting money he probably couldn't afford to lose into strippers' underwear. "Hey, Pete," he continued as Hope crawled by with her t-shirt in her teeth. "Did I tell you I've got this whole other name? Yeah, I'm really someone else, man. Kyle Winward. My real mom's part Chippewa Indian. I found all about her. I could stalk her or whatever. God, Pete, you wouldn't believe all the pussy I got back when I was dealing. I'll show up at a chick's apartment and maybe she wouldn't have all the money, so what I do is..." And Peter almost said it. Almost interrupted with, "Listen, Carly's pregnant." Not because he wanted Jocko to know, but because he wanted Jocko to stop talking, and this was the only thing he could think of. He put that thought down and grabbed another. "So what happened with Simone anyway?" he asked. "What's the story?" Jocko took a swig of beer and looked into the middle distance between Hope's legs. "We're just on different paths right now," he said. And Peter knew that was the only explanation he was going to get. More girls started to arrive. They came in jeans and t-shirts, then into the women's bathroom, and out again in white lingerie and pigtails and nighties and knee socks and cheerleader outfits and panties made of fine, shiny chains. Peter was reminded of a night when, flipping channels, he had lingered on a women's wrestling match between a nurse and a schoolgirl. Carly was surprised he could be interested in such a cliché, and Peter had explained to her, only realizing the truth of it as he spoke, that when it came to lust, a thing like cliché didn't matter, because lust was a region into which the critical mind could only get so far. You could talk evolutionary psychology, you could talk feminism or Freud or the way it should be, but those were only dirt roads into lust, and sometime in the night they would be washed away. A woman in blonde dreadlocks high-heeled her way over to them, older than most of the others with a loose beer gut. She was so far off from Jocko's description of Crystal that Peter didn't know who she was until the second time Jocko had said her name. This discrepancy was gratifying to Peter. He didn't actually see Jocko all that often, but Carly and he tended to talk about his old friend a lot. Offering people they knew up for discussion was a hobby of theirs, and with Jocko there was just so much to discuss. There was the time they'd run into him at a coffee shop, and he claimed to having found the cure for cancer, which apparently involved crossbreeding pot with some kind of wild rose. There was a time a few Christmases back when Jocko's mom was at Peter's parents' house to show off her new pure breed, and she said to Peter, matter-of-factly, "Our son didn't work out for us, so now we have a dog." And then, of course, there was the Simone White story, a favorite among Peter and Carly's friends for months. At dinner parties, they would offer it up, uncover it like a steamy, buttery lobster dish. Most of their friends wanted to talk about how this could possibly have happened, how the woman who'd written love songs like Even Call and A History of Somewhere Else could possibly go for someone like Jocko, even if he was 20 years younger than she. But what interested Peter most in these conversations was how Jocko challenged the norm of how to live a life. Granted, Peter would say, the man was a mess, unstable, ill-equipped for happiness, likely to die any day from an overdose or a gun to the head, But then this same restlessness had also led to moments of extreme vitality and a sort of grace that allowed Jocko to live in a mansion in Mendocino, have orgies, go hang gliding in Yellowstone Park, and become Simone White's boyfriend, if only for a year. It was a question, Peter would insist, of high highs and low lows versus stability. And though he had made this same argument half a dozen times, whenever he was actually with Jocko, Peter found himself looking for counter-evidence that maybe the highs weren't really that high, or the lows too low to make them worth it. If Crystal wasn't anything close to the way she'd been described, then maybe the hang gliding and orgies weren't either. Jocko bought the three of them shots of whiskey with beer chasers, and now he was telling Crystal about Peter and their relationship, or his and Peter's childhood friendship, smash ball, butts up, sneaking into Stephen Pinkney's house to watch their first porno. In Peter's opinion, it wasn't anything all that interesting for someone who hadn't lived it, but either Crystal was interested after all, or great at faking it. You see this guy? Jocko said, lobbing an arm around Peter. We've known each other since we were 1. Another favorite topic between Peter and Carly was why he bothered with Jocko at all. She just wanted to know. It was a good question, a question with any number of answers, and none of them quite sufficient. Peter might say, for instance, that it was a vicarious thrill, that since he himself had never done heroin or lived in the street or killed a kitten by accidentally slamming a door on it during a fight with a girlfriend, he wanted to know what all that was like. Or else he might talk about lingering guilt brought on by the fact that he'd had a stable upbringing, while 2 blocks down in a house even nicer than his, Jocko's adopted dad was telling him what a constant letdown he was, and his adopted mom was ignoring him. Or maybe this renewed false friendship was a tribute to that real friendship of their youth, a friendship that had run as deep as human relationships do, deeper in many ways than Peter's relationship with Carly, even if he couldn't now say why and how he'd lost the whole timbre of it somehow in the process of growing up. But then Peter had never been good with feelings, had never trusted them or quite understood what they were. Or else maybe he had. Maybe he used to and just didn't anymore. Jocko had gone off for a lap dance with Crystal. Peter was trying to wave Hope down for a lap dance of his own and thinking of all the things about Jocko as a way of distracting himself from Carly's pregnancy and what they would do about it. The girls were starting to repeat on stage, and it was comforting to Peter how much less interesting they were the second time around. He ordered another beer, started to feel good, relaxed, ready to go home. He'd had his bit of wildness for the night, and he would return to Carly and report back. Jocko is lost, his life a fantasy. Let us now proceed with ours. Somewhere in the middle of Peter's resolve, Jocko had returned. He was saying something into Peter's ear, and it took a while to register. He was going to get the 2 of them invited over to Crystal's house along with Hope. Jocko, Peter began, but he was cut off. What? Said Jocko. Just hanging out, and then whatever you decide, okay? He took a long swig of his beer and swished it around in his mouth while shaking his head. Then he said, Pete Rickersley, doing the right thing, as if it were a slogan on a sign. That's it for now. Thanks a lot. Here's my wonderful wife.
All right, everybody, let me adjust this. Oh, Zoe, I think I just messed up your mic. Excuse us 1 second. Okay, are we back up and running? Okay, excellent. Well, hello, everybody. How are you? Thanks for answering. Well, I just want to say thank you all for having me. I mean, everyone who's helped put this on, and of course, Harlaxton, but of course, Deletta and Amber and Anne and Linda and Jerry and Ian, who's not, he might be here, but he maybe isn't. But just thank you to everybody. I'm going to read some old poems. Well, not old, but just from this book that came out 2 years ago, and then some new ones. So I'm going to begin with this one called Space Bears and Doxology. And the inspiration for this poem was a newspaper article about the Smoky Mountains. I'm from Tennessee, about an hour away from the Smokies. So the first part is strangely true. Space Bears and Doxology. First reports described a runaway bear wearing a space helmet. I'm not surprised. It is Tennessee, and black bears gone alien are a possibility. Here, life not as it seems is the hope. So after a month, wildlife rescuers tracked the scat to find a juvenile male with his head stuck in a plastic Walmart candy jar. The vet judged the bear one winter away from death, having lost half its body weight. He had learned to drink by lying down in shallow streams where the water would seep in slow enough to keep him from drowning. The story reminds me how as a child I sewed pink curtains onto roach motels, figuring they would like it better this way, both the coming and the going, the curtains a lure and an escort. Excuse me. I know the bear doesn't debate about any of this, but if there were such a thing as heaven, wouldn't it be the moment that candy jar was removed, the rush of autumn air on his face, no barrier between paw and tongue, touch and taste, the world as it is now and ever shall be, suddenly right before him, roughing cheeks with sun on autumn mornings, and if he's lucky, pricking his eyes with the sting of sleet come winter. Oh, y'all are sweet. And Zoe, did I mess it up again? So this next poem is from this book that, as Diletta mentioned, talks a little bit about my father. He's a paranoid schizophrenic. He's treatment resistant, which a lot of paranoids, not a lot, but it's debated that about 15 to maybe 50% of paranoid schizophrenics are treatment resistant, depends what study you look at. The thing with my father is, since I allowed him to be homeless, meaning when I couldn't keep him in my house, he just has kept on the move. He's very afraid of staying put. But the thing about him and about, I guess, a lot of homeless people is he does not want to ever have you think he is homeless, because that is another point of vulnerability. For example, in the United States, almost half of the homeless now are women with children. And so it's going to be a part of the population who wants to remain hidden. So this next poem, called Lemons Are Not Nipples, addresses, I guess, my own guilt about my father. The tip of a lemon is not a nipple. The spine of a book is not the spine of a man's back. No thing is anything else. These are lies a poet tells to avoid certain truths. The closest I have come to holding a dying man's hand is witnessing a buffalo slaughtered. Blood glugged out in rhythm with his tapering heartbeat, but I couldn't tell when life switched off. An hour maybe before the animal stilled. I think of my father, a man who must keep moving, who is never without a suitcase or place to leave. It will happen while he waits to cross the street, bag in hand. He will not notice the light-changing, blank-faced suits bumping his shoulders, curb empties in seconds, and he will remain, drivers at the red light marveling at such stillness. Not so much a man, one of them might think, but a metaphor pointing someplace else. So what I want to show for you next is a moving poem. We'll see if this is all up and running. Dave Richardson took one of my creative nonfiction essays / poems, and he turned it into a movie that was actually recently shown in Bath at the film festival they had there. So let me see. Give me one sec. So I'm going to read, part of my book ended up moving into evolutionary anthropology just because I got very curious about this idea of homes. And so I wanted to figure out, when did we ever start living in homes to begin with, right? And of course, the idea is around about 15,000 years ago. But with any change, there is a trade-off. And what was first the, I guess, downside of remaining stationary, of no longer being nomadic, is you made yourself vulnerable to attack, right? Which is interesting, though, thinking about it now, how we are constantly having to remind ourselves to move, right? Stand up from the desk, stand up on the train, stand up on the plane. At this point, it was, though, very frightening to stay settled in communities. But the fascinating thing is, what we're learning is that cooking was the thing that enabled us to be able to be part of communities together. So I'm going to read you 3 short sections from this long, very long 18-page poem, but I'm not going to, just 3 pages, so you can see how the science kind of comes into this one story about my father's life. We'll do that next, if it behaves. No. Yeah, okay, we'll just wait. We were born from wood and fire, roasting small mammals as we sat in circles, the sizzle spit, a fat striking flame. And outside the circle, darkness, stalk of hyena, crick shift of his step, the man lifting a torch, jabbing that dark until the sounds flee back to the quiet, to the sizzle spits, shifts of logs carboned and bone thin, ashed by morning. In this series, each page sort of responds to the next page, so now this is the more scientific explanation for what I just read. Anthropologists are discovering that, quote, we were born from wood and fire, end quote, is less figurative than it seemed. Taming fire led to cooking, which led to more calories, which led to bigger brains, and to language, speech, communities with clusters of moms, dads, Bobbies, and Sallys. But with everything gained, there is loss. What is the equation for this? Simply 1 + 1 is no longer 1. With taming fire, what was lost? Feeding oneself one fruit, one nut, one leaf as monkeys feed ended with control of fire. We became communal, became communities of who does what, who scoops honey from hives, who cuts tongue from antelope, who scrapes corn from husk. We became arranged into cooks and hunters, husbands and wives, into worlds of many small fires and many small roofs, fathers and daughters, lovers and exes, connected by a desire to forget where we have come from. Let's play this.
"1986, winter of Challenger disaster, O-rings, solid rocket boosters, southern cold snaps. Dad blinked at a break in the news coverage, walked out the door, leaving my brother and me saying for days he was right here, as if the man were a ring of lost keys. He returned 6 weeks later, but this seemed repeated into routine. His duffel bag remained on the hearth, half filled with Twinkies, yardage stats on touchdown passes, newspaper clippings on the sheriff's helicopter purchases. Always unknown when he would come and go. My brother and I were 16 and 10, ran the house accordingly. I'd spit in the stew, forgetting I'd have to eat it too. My brother paid me $0.25 a day not to cry. Dad downplayed returns to a simple, hey, head nod, stacks of hundreds for groceries and heat. 5 years earlier, with day trip to the future, viewed Space Shuttle Columbia OV-102 being built. It loomed over Florida's flatness, sat stiff and upright like a scared schoolgirl. The metal scaffolding alongside it, an organized mess of angles, impressive as the shuttle itself. I tripped on the newly paved tarmac, still ridged from nowhere. Dad began yelling how he'd sue, told me it would be the ugliest scar, doomed me to short men who play guitar. His parenting style was listing off dramatic dangers. Poltergeist head swivels, lawnmower toes, detached retinas. But my fears were the seemingly harmless. A father in a white bathrobe standing by my bed. A black government Buick pulling into the drive. So I wasn't surprised when the billion-dollar marvel turned to dust over the Texas sky. A bundle of titanium brought down by a single cut from a small piece of falling foam.
So Dave, again, Dave Richardson was the one who did the graphics on that, and we collaborated on the images, and of course, that voice was mine, as you probably figured out. All right, I'm going to switch things now to new poems, and this is going to be in keeping with the happy mood I have established. This is called Joy is Earned, and it is for Shara Shaman, birth dates 1971 to 2014. It's easy to forget birth and death are partners, hovering in a corner at an otherwise pleasant party. Right after the birth of her second child, the doctor said, "It's back, the cancer." My friend writes the update now, subject heading something with the word joy. The message lists the baby's weight, his height, his favorite song, facts strung along like blue and white pennants. She tells us too that doctors agree no more options exist. I read the mass email in my office, desk lumped with half-assed student essays, bowl of dum-dums, quorum of hand sanitizers. What is it I had been worrying about? We treat these bodies like rented ponies, wash them up for the big events, tie pink ribbons in the manes, then load them down again, ignore them until everything slows to a stop in a circle of circles. My friend continues with what she wishes for, wishing as if such a thing were possible, as if a birthday cake were being carried from the darkened kitchen, the rest of us scrambling to dim the lights, find the right pitch as she leans in, candles casting a yellow circle onto her face. "It's peaceful," she says. "In my 20s, I worried about what I wanted to be. Now I know I want to be old." So, yeah. So that's for my friend Shara Shaman. She was my first writing buddy. She was that person, maybe like you in a class, who's like, okay, we're going to do this together. And so it was crushing when she passed away. And she died actually of a similar type of cancer that killed her mother, which then leads me to start thinking about this, right? And so I'm working on this project now that it's a 23-part poem sequence, one poem for each of our pair of chromosomes, but I have completely fictional characters now. There is a mother who's recently had a child who is dying, the father of the child, the geneticist, but also, just to complicate things, the mother's own DNA has a role, because I'm very interested. It's so much fascinating research that's being done on DNA right now, but I'm very interested in what the research can't tell us. And so part of my curiosity with this is, as this mother is mourning her own death, I was thinking, what does DNA think of these ideas of birth and death? Does it have such nice little segments that we like to give it, like a birth date and a death date? And exactly where does the construction of identity, like personality, come in? How much is this mother actually in control? So I'm going to read, let's see how we're doing on time here. I'm going to read 2 poems from this series. I'll do one from the mother and one from DNA herself. So just to be clear, this is fictional. I am not dying. I don't want anyone to get confused. This one is called After the Prognosis, from the mother's point of view. I own these woods where children play their various games of murder. I can't relax into my grief. It's full of thinning deer, bulging ticks, children's screams outlining air. Always the stitch of some dark bird. Some of the best hiders believe they'll never be found. Watch the red sneaker without the legs, smell leaves in that moment of disarray, feel the sweat slip from their pores. All my life, I've looked for light this slow. Inevitably, the chill, thrill of fingertips chasing, grazing, hands swiping the back, and then, is that glee or relief in the voice that declares, "You're it! Ollie, ollie, oxen free. Ollie, ollie, oxen free." All right. And so this is from DNA's point of view. One thing you need to know on this one is, everyone know Karen, the ferryman who carries people on his boat from, I guess, for Hades to the land of the dead. A's DNA reflects on this thing called death. I cannot offer wisdom about Karen's leaky rowboat cajoling us, swaying between the worlds, but I can offer that the wooden floor is always wet. Boards soft with salt and slosh, paint rubbed off by tapping boots. I can offer that wisdom carries with it blood. We want to pretend otherwise, pretend that life doesn't require the taking of life. I cannot begin and tell you stories that begin with those quick, trusty consonants and end with vowels of oh, ah, those stories of great fish who drove us to discover soul, those stories with an albatross white as sin. What I can tell you is that everywhere there are birds, from wharves to sky rises, twiddling the air, and still we ask for more. I can offer that this thing called heat is a fire that seeks solitude, the crisp neatness of black stubble instead of field, and I can offer that matter trying to tear us apart is neither dark nor invisible. Finally, I can tell you this, that the words come back are often the last you'll ever hear. All right, guys. I'm going to wrap it up now, and then Adam and I can take some questions. This poem is called Talia Chasing Grapefruit. All you need to know is Talia is a Cocker Spaniel. And she was this Cocker Spaniel at this lovely writer's residency that I went to in Costa Rica. So it's just this place reserved for writers and artists to go there and do their work. And this flea-ridden dog had her way and just made it into everyone's hearts and into everyone's apartment. Talia Chasing Grapefruit. The grapefruit rolls downhill, that motion June morning. Fruit heavy with 7 days' rain, climbing ants, plump, white-veined seeds. The wide paws of the golden spaniel flail after it like a conductor crisscrossing his arms in a final dare of energy. Evolution, somewhere then and now, went a little manic. Did a step ball change tap movement, and then the fish walked, the seed split, wet, craving more. But we should take away agency. The seed sprouted, the sprout seeded. There are limits to our knowledge, limits describing the comedic effect of Talia finally squashing her teeth into the fruit, flipping her head high and prancing by, drooling juice. Sometimes it's best when a poem fails, reminds us of what we can't obtain, like simplicity, like dog, sunlight, rolling grapefruits. Thank you all. You've been very nice to receive. Adam, going to come on up here? Okay.
All right, y'all. We're happy to take questions for either of us or both of us. Or
I have a question for both of you. What motivates you or gives you the freedom to share such interpersonal details or to write so freely about so many different topics? So I know it can be scary
Yeah.
sometimes probably to put that out there.
Yes, and knowing I will see all of your faces for every day for the next. Usually I do readings out of town, then I run away. So that works great. But no, honestly, I think for me there's a question of what am I going to write versus what am I going to publish. And so I really believe as a writer, you have to let yourself go wherever it is you need to go. And then there comes a point where you can decide if you want to share that or not. But I've just found that when you try to tell yourself, I'm not going to write about X, like I did not tell anybody about my father until I wrote this book. I don't even think my friends knew. And what I found is I was holding back on other subjects too. There's a way that when you censor yourself in one arena as a writer, it often has you not try other things that you should be trying. So that's my sort of response.
I mean, for one thing, being a fiction writer, one of the great things, there are some terrible things about being a fiction writer, but one great thing about being a fiction writer is you can always, I mean, it's always fiction, right? You can always hide behind the fact that it's fiction, right? So whatever I write, it's fiction, even if there are true parts to it. But I mean, as far as that issue about writing about stuff that's perhaps controversial or squirm-inducing, maybe, is it? I mean, one thing is I just can't help writing what interests me, and that seems to be what interests me. But another thing is that I believe firmly that it is part of my job as a literary writer, or as a writer who tries to think of himself as a literary writer, to make you all a little uncomfortable. I think that's part of what I'm supposed to do. And I think it's part of what I'm supposed to do to make myself a little uncomfortable. And I think if I'm not doing that, I'm not really doing what I set out to do. So it just has something to do with that, I guess.
I'm also like thinking, I mean, we talk about each other's work all the time. Adam loves to explore the character who's behaving poorly, right? Looking at that, but I don't know why you do.
I can talk about that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, you probably all have questions. Do you want to know? Do you want to talk? Do you want to know about this? I can tell you about this. I think it's very important to understand why we all behave badly, because we all do behave badly. And we like to believe that, we all acknowledge that there is evil in the world, but we like to believe that it's this thing, right? That it's like, it's the Nazis, right? And they're gone, so whatever. Or it's Al-Qaeda or whatever the hell, But we all behave badly at moments. And I think we have to come to terms with that. I think that we have to try to understand what makes that happen. I think it's one thing, I don't think it's my job as a writer to talk about the world that I wish would be. I think it's my job as a writer to talk about the world as it is, and I think coming to terms with why we behave badly is very important, and even perhaps having empathy for people who behave badly, because we're all that person at some point, to some degree. I guess that's why.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, Patty.
A comment first and then a question. Well, when you think about it, Dante's Divine Comedy, the only one that people care about is the Inferno.
Right.
That's a great point.
Worse.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, and the question that I have is, Mario Vargas Llosa in his memoir said that at the beginning of your career, you have to write about yourself. You have to write about your, would you comment on that? Writing about yourself to some degree.
Actually, yeah. So this book that came out, technically I would say is my second book. I had this other book that I had written. It was like really about Buddhism and just very far removed from myself, and it was getting ready to be published. Like it was a finalist in this one contest, and I could tell it was. You can get a sense from the editors that they were probably going to pick it, and I decided I did not want that to be my first book. I felt like it was a false portrayal of where I had come from, that this book represents where I came from, and so I pulled the book from the contest, Forever Made an Enemy, from that publisher, which is in England, by the way, and then I set out to write this one, and it was kind of a fury, I would say, for about 2 years, just pushing that other book aside. And even though I knew it could go, I needed to begin where I began.
I think one of the interesting things about that too is that, I mean, sometimes fiction and poetry are quite different in these ways. And when you're writing poetry, the starting assumption is it's always about yourself in one way or another. In fiction, that's less the case. But one of the things that's interesting about that is, when I was writing this book, The Beautiful Wishes of Ugly Men, I didn't see these characters as having anything to do with myself or what I was going through at the time. And it was only many years later, looking at the book, that all the different autobiographical elements started to sort of poke through. I was in a relationship that for a long time it was really not working, and had a lot of guilt about it. And that bubbles up all over the collection. But I didn't see it that way at all. I just thought I was writing different stories about different people, but sometimes, I mean, this is such an important thing that I teach my students all the time is that craft, yes, craft is hugely important, and I want to teach them craft, but your subconscious is such a powerful thing, and just because you do something, just because you make a move in a story that you didn't mean to do, that you didn't know was there, that doesn't mean it's not valuable. Often that's the most valuable thing in the whole story. Someone else in your class will point out, say the stories about a guy going to visit his grandmother, and a student will raise his hand and be like, God, there's so much resentment toward the grandmother. The writer will be like, no, I didn't mean that at all. But it's in there, right? It's even if the writer doesn't know it's in there, and sometimes it's the most interesting thing about the story.
Yeah.
As writers, when you're writing something negative and dark, how do you get yourself out of that headspace? When you're like done writing for the day?
This is I think why I love teaching. It fully, like, you go into that classroom and then that's your world then, right? And everything else kind of goes away. We also have a 4-year-old who she commands her attention. I don't know if it's anything that I necessarily plan, but it's just usually you wrap it up, take a breath. I write down what I'm going to start with the next day, and then I let it go.
For me, it's just so much of the delight of the process itself. You know what I mean? If I'm writing about something dark, but if I'm doing it in a way that I'm really happy with and really proud of, or, I get so involved in the process, and the process itself is such a joy. Does that make sense? That even if I'm rendering something kind of dark, my goal is to get at it. I'm much more likely to be depressed about a writing project doing badly than I am depressed about whatever dark thing I'm writing about.
That's so true.
And that I get depressed about all the time.
Yeah, that's totally true too. Yeah.
It's wonderful listening to the way that you use those words, both of you, in your fiction and your poetry. How many times do you have to redraft your work? Or is that
Ooh.
straight?
A lot. A whole lot. Oh, yeah. I don't even know. Did you see I brought a pen up here? I was editing as I was reading. I was like, I don't know about this line. So for me, it's 50 drafts per poem, maybe?
Yeah, tons. I mean, tons. I once brought a stack of drafts to my students, my writing students, because they were discouraged, and I just had all the printed drafts that I had of a single story that was like 20 pages, I just brought it in, but a lot, yeah. And what I do is I print it out, and then I start with a white screen. Because otherwise all this, you get so finicky otherwise, right? I'm just making these tiny little changes, but I don't want to do that. I want to print it out, I want to rewrite it, I want to re-see it. So yeah, I would say easily probably 10 of those big drafts like that, and then several in the, I'm writing a novel, it's going to take forever.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Hi.
I'm really obsessed with contradictions when it comes to writing, and so the idea of beauty and vulgarity, and
Yeah.
also art and science combined.
Mm-hmm.
So I find your stuff really interesting. But is it hard to work in that kind of in between space?
Not hard. I really love it. I have to do a lot of research for the poems that I write, and so I find that there are moments where I'm doing more research than actual writing on the project. So like here probably will be a little bit more research, given that this is where so many DNA advances are being made. So no, I'm kind of comfortable with that. I do think that I have to, a lot of writers will say they have to stop the research because you can get sucked in and feel like that's writing. I do make sure that I'm producing something. It might be an easier poem that's not so tied into others. So that's kind of how I go about it. But I love it. That's what gets me going.
And it creates a tension in the work, right? I mean, there's a reason you're interested in it, I think, is that it creates a push and pull in the work. Charlotte, by temperament, is quite an emotional person. So you may or may not know that. So by using science, it has this great tension or sort of counterbalance in her work. And yeah, I mean, and I think for me, the beauty ugliness thing works sort of differently thematically in those pieces of sort of like, I mean, even the title, I'm trying to sort of elicit a sense of what beauty and ugly sort of means and is for different people, and sort of the problems that those tensions can cause, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the readings. You talked about writing about yourselves. I would like to ask you, both the poet and the fiction writer, for whom are you writing? Are you writing for yourselves or for your projected or anticipated audience?
The audience. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a point whenever you enter a creative writing classroom that you cross that bridge and it's crossed. Because at that point, when you start sharing your work with others, you're asking, how are these words affecting the reader? And ultimately, they're the arbiters of if it's effective or not. So it's what interests what gets me, the subjects I choose, but otherwise I always have the reader in my mind.
To me that strikes me as something of a false distinction. I mean, language is a bridge, right? It is a communication, right? It's a place from here to there, from me to you, and so the bridge has to work, right? You can sit on one side of it and feel superior, or you can build the damn bridge, right? So the way I see it is, I'm building this thing to, and again, I'm very interested in it, but I need to execute, right? It needs to be interesting to you all, hopefully, or somebody, and that's where the craft comes in, and a lot of that is what makes it such an interesting challenge, right? I think that if I just wrote for myself, and I mean, I think that that's a great decision. I have a good friend from college. Her dad is a poet who has never submitted any work. He's been a poet all his life, and he's never submitted any work to any journal. He just writes for himself, and I think that's wonderful. That's a great choice to make if you want to make that choice. But I think that the craft comes in the transmission, right? The craft comes in with how is the reader going to interpret that, and that is a tricky challenge that it fascinates me.
All right, maybe one last question, and then we can all go to the reception set up behind us. Or we can just go to the reception set up behind us.
We've answered all their questions.
All right. Oh no, the gentleman in the back.
I was wondering if you read each other's work before it goes to the publishing house, and if you edit each other's work, and if that's kind of tricky for them.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Yeah. You know what's really tricky is we started co-writing. That's the worst thing. Don't ever do that. He's my best reader for sure. He's my best reader, and he isn't that interested in poetry or DNA or evolution. So he's really my best reader.
I'm fairly interested in poetry. I mean, I'm interested in DNA and evolution. Poetry less so. No.
But it's helpful, right? And I don't mean that sarcastically. Knowing that I think poets can get themselves wrapped up and people should like it. And I think as a writer, I need to make them like it.
Yeah, and I say that, I mean, I even write a little poetry, so I'm sort of me. But no, yeah, I think we read each other's work a lot, and we really, when it's working, it works. When it's working well, it works very, very well. We're giving each other a lot of ideas and pushing each other and having, sometimes we'll be well, we don't have the time to talk in bed really anymore in the morning, but we'll have these mornings where we're just talking in bed about poetry, and I think this is exactly what our students think we do. Just talk about poetry. But yeah, it's very helpful.
All right. Well, thank you guys. You were very generous with your time. Thanks so much for coming.